Hey, welcome to Blue Jay Banner, sponsored by Equitable Bank. We take banking personally here on the Blue Jay Banner podcast channel. Thanks for joining us. Make sure you hit subscribe down below and also share this with all Blue Jay Nation. Thanks so much for joining us on this very special show. Today we have one guest and one guest only, and it's going to take, we could probably talk 3 hours on this subject. And if you've been following us, you know we've talked extensively about NIL and the different ramifications throughout the season. And tonight we got an expert, Professor David Weber of Creighton University. He's professor of law at Creighton, and also he is the moderator for the sports law concentration. And basically what that means is he's one of the head guys as far as NIL goes with Creighton. And not only that, he's one of the experts around the country. He was just in an ESPN article. He has a lot of knowledge about the international players, which is something, Ross, you and I have talked a ton about. And so I'm excited to get, more clarification on that as well. And then just recently, new legislation, Senator Lindsey Graham put forth a bill to establish a clearinghouse that would basically oversee all of this NIL, and they would be given powers to, fine universities, fine collectives, shut down collectives, and not only that, fine players who don't follow the contracts as well. So, and I don't know about the fining part, but some sort of disciplinary action. I don't know. Anyway, basically taking this totally off the NCAA's plate and doing it themselves, which I think probably is best. I think most people would agree. And so we'll talk some about that as well. And then we've had tons of questions, not only on our Twitter account, but over at bluejaybanner.com. And we'll try and work all those into the discussion as we move along so we can answer everybody's questions. I know there's a lot of confusion on a lot of different things. I know collectives are confusing to everyone, and hopefully David's going to be able to clear up those as well. Before he comes on here in a little bit, have you watched any of Trey or Kalk in the workouts?
I have not. I don't follow that stuff as closely as I, probably should, or my interest in the NBA would suggest. I don't know. It's kind of similar to recruiting to me in a little bit. I love watching the NBA draft, but I don't. There's only so many hours in the day. I just can't keep track of all of it. So
not only that, I don't think you're watching a scrimmage where Trey and Kalk are involved. I mean,
it's really
such a teeny tiny sliver of what they're evaluating.
The 5-on-5 portions are really sloppy. I don't know. For whatever reason, the combine, all those sorts of things, they just don't interest me as much as you would maybe think that they do.
I don't blame you. I'm a big NFL guy. I can't watch the NFL it bores me to tears. I just don't, because a guy runs a 4.340. That doesn't mean he's going to get drafted any higher, any lower. And gosh, these people have been hanging on every word. And Joel Lorenzi's actually been there the whole time, which shocked me. Because gosh, they won't even let him go on road games. They let him go to the combine. Of course, that's Joel's kind of thing. He's an NBA guy, and people are reading way too much into what he's saying. He's just observing. He's not. So I don't know where they stand. That people seem to be going up and down the board. It seems like Trey is the guy. If there's one that's maybe impressed more than others, it's been Trey. Mm-hmm. But then there's a certain CBS writer who's really been pumping Trey the whole time, so he's super high on him. Oh, the teams are high. Well, you don't know who he's talked to, really, And not only that, you don't know if teams are just blowing smoke, You really don't.
Right.
So we'll just have to wait and see is all I can. Of course, people are already panicking now that, oh, my God, they're doing well. They're both going to get drafted. What are we going to do? Oh, my word. Everybody just relax. Just relax. Everything will be fine. The sun will come up in November. And we're going to play the Iowa Hawkeyes. How great is that?
Well, I didn't see that.
Yeah. Iowa's coming to Omaha, baby. That will be one packed house.
When did that come out?
Just today. just today.
I haven't really been on Twitter much, I guess.
Creighton
Yeah, that's
playing
it.
Iowa. We've already got locked in, I think, Texas Southern for a Saturday game on the 18th of November, which is kind of the week before. I kind of had us penciled in for a bye game, so maybe that Iowa game would be a Friday or Saturday.
There's not a tweet from the official Creighton account about it.
I know. Well, Rothstein had all the matchups. He laid them all out.
Oh, he did. Okay.
Yeah, I had said that earlier, and somebody jumped on me and said, "Well, they can't play Iowa because."
What were you saying about why you think it'll be a
weekend game? I originally had the season starts on a Monday. We always have that first game, and then we usually have one that following weekend, and that's a game I thought would be a bye game. Okay. And then I thought there'd be another bye game and then maybe the Big Ten game after that. Well, we've signed a contract with Texas Southern on the 18th. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that would say to me, we're either going to push that Iowa game to a Tuesday game earlier that week, or perhaps the weekend before, which would be awesome. That's what I'm kind of hoping for. If we can get a Friday or Saturday night game with Iowa, can you imagine how crazy that place would be? There's so many Hawkeye fans around here. That'd be nuts.
Yeah, that would be a fun game. There's no doubt about it. Yeah.
I know we're kind of hoping if Calk came back, we'd play Purdue and it'd be Edey against Calk. If Edey came back, but hey, that's both up in the air anyway. So, and I'd said early in the season, I said, well, Iowa, and somebody said, no, we can't play Iowa because Iowa was on the road last year. And I said, I don't think that makes a whole. I think they changed that in a snap of a finger. And the fact that we have never played Iowa in this makes zero sense. Like, we've never played Iowa in this, and we've never played Minnesota in this, the two closest schools to us. Like, we should be playing one or two of them in this deal. So I'm really happy we're playing Iowa. So now that's a nice non-conference schedule because of our our MTE that kind of crapped out on us. We got Alabama and Iowa at home and at Oklahoma State. So that's three quality games without overscheduling.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, the Kansas City event's a little bit down, but that's okay. You got those other teams in the mix. I think Nebraska will be okay. They've got some pieces. They're not a dog of that league, I don't think, next year. I mean, it could end up being, it's not going to be as hard as this most recent year's non-conference schedule, but that's okay. I don't think anybody wants that again.
Yeah. I personally, I'm okay with it. Bring it on. Let's face it, if Calk hadn't gotten mono, we probably could have withstood that schedule pretty well, actually.
I agree.
We probably would have won both games in Vegas, and then, there would have been nothing else said, right? We're probably going to lose.
The interesting thing about Vegas is, and this doesn't make this thing apples to apples, but, the crazy thing is Frederick King came in for Calk and played really, really well.
The second game. First game, Fred had some issues against BYU, but second game against Arizona State, much better interior talent on Arizona State. Yes, I totally 100% agree with you. He played really well that game. Really well. Really well. That was just the other thing too. I talked to people who would watch BYU a ton. They said, BYU just played terrible all year. This is far and away their best game they played. And the same with Arizona State. So, it is what it is.
Yeah.
But at any rate, so that was a big basketball news with those two notes. And I think that's awesome because now that really only leaves us maybe, I think, 2 bye games to really fill out our schedule. And we'll pretty much be done. And really, with that schedule, you could play a decent team. You know what I mean? Like, you could play let me think of somebody. You could play a Wyoming or maybe somebody in the A-10, Dayton, or somebody like that. You could play a decent team. You don't have to play.
I don't think
bottom of the bottom.
They're not going to do that though. I think they're going to just go the low major route. There's not a ton of upside. I think the thought process for a lot of those high majors, or a lot of good programs like ours is there's not a ton of upside of playing a decent mid-major. You know, I mean, you know that. I mean, as a bracketologist, I mean, it's almost kind of a lose-lose a little bit. Like, why would you go play George Mason? Like, what's the point?
There's a huge deal though with strength of schedule and so forth. When you play, for instance, a conference traditionally, because I did a big full-blown study on this about 3 years ago. It's probably changed a little now, but there's incredible value in playing MAC teams because they never are that low. They're never 300. They're 200. They're 190. That doesn't hurt you on your strength of schedule like playing a 300-plus team does.
Yeah, but a potential loss could really hurt you.
But for the most part, if you're a good team and you're playing them at home, you're going to beat that team. You know, there's nobody in the MAC that's going to come in to CHI that we're going to lose to. We could if we played awful, I guess. But for the most part, if we play our game, we're going to beat that team. And you don't have to pick Toledo or Ohio. You could pick, Bowling Green or Central Michigan. Somebody in the mid-range of those conferences. Same way another conference I looked at was you would think the A10 was better than it was, but they really have a lot of bad bottom feeders sometimes, and they're hard to predict. But there are different conferences around the country. Gosh, it'd be nice to play Lutz, Western Kentucky. There we go.
Yeah, I don't know if Lutz will do that year one out the gate, but
should I suggest that? I can suggest that to him and see. Not to rain on everybody's parade here on this beautiful sunny day and with this wonderful discussion of NIL coming up here in a few minutes, but wow, the baseball team. Beating UConn the first night, that gave them a 1.5 lead over Georgetown. It looked like, okay, we're almost in now. The Jays get pummeled the next 2 games, and then Georgetown beats Xavier 2 times in a row. Xavier had the bases loaded in the last game, 1 out, and they hit into a 4-6-3 double play at end of the game. They scored some runs there. They'd have won the game. Then Creighton goes to the Big East tournament. Now the Creighton season's over. There were some local media on the field after the game. Of course, the question was going to come up to Ed, and Ed has said this pretty consistently. If unless somebody tells me otherwise, I will be back next year. So he's basically saying,
why is that started to gain some steam? What?
I think it's gained a little steam over. You had COVID in there, so that and then these guys play extra years because of that. So it was kind of like, it's kind of hard. Baseball was kind of tough because they took that whole season away, and then so now you recruit. You've got guys who've been sitting around for 2 years, and I think everybody was kind of giving them a little slack over that. They were still making the Big East tournament, but they weren't as competitive at the top as they would like to have been. And I think after last year when they weren't very competitive, they made the Big East tournament again, but they weren't very competitive. I think people really were kind of looking at this year, and this year was really, it was a 500 season. And not making the Big East tournament, when we came into the Big East, the thing was we should win either the regular season or the conference title 2 out of every 3 years and that's probably down a little bit, right? So that's kind of picked up a little bit of steam, and as we all are, Ed is not getting any younger. So anyway, but let us totally flip this topic around to NIL, because this is going to be incredibly interesting and informative. And we are so thankful to have Professor David Weber joining us here on Blue Jay Banner. Hi, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
And as I said earlier, he is the faculty moderator for sports law concentration, and quite an expert. Boy, you're getting in ESPN articles. That's a big deal.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. This is a space where the parts are moving quickly. People are acting and reacting. So it's just a lot of fun to be able to do this as part of my job.
Well, we've got a lot to unpack, and we talked, yesterday, and you could go on for 3-4 hours on this. So we're going to condense it way down. But when I think of NIL, I think that the first time I remembered around here was probably when Eric Crouch was going to win the Heisman, and they were selling the number 7 jerseys, but they could only sell the number 7 jerseys. They couldn't sell the ones that said Crouch on the back. And then people said, well, gosh, it's his jersey. They're selling those because of him. Why can't he get some money? And of course, there was nothing in place. And then we moved further down the road and Doug McDermott. And gosh, I know some people. I know a guy that printed up Doug McDermott shirts with a picture on and got really slapped by Creighton for having that. So that was, I think when it all started, that's what I kind of thought about. Oh yeah, it'll be cool. The players get some money from these jerseys and merchandise sales and things like that. Well, we all know it's exploded way beyond that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think actually all the way back to the early 2000s. I don't know if you remember Jeremy Bloom, who was a world champion mogul skier who had all these endorsement deals, wanted to play football for Colorado University. And the NCAA came and said, well, we can't tell whether or not you're getting these endorsement deals because of your gold medals or because of your football ability. And so he was put in that bind where the NCAA said, you're not going to be eligible to play football if you continue with this money, even though he was earning that money in a completely separate realm. And so the NCAA has really tried to police this and have people toe the line, but I think that they did so strictly that we've now seen public opinion flip 180 degrees. And now most of the general public thinks, all right, these college kids should get paid for their name, image, and likeness, right? It is their name that's selling that jersey, that's bringing in those fans.
I agree with you, but like the person I live with, she doesn't think that they should be making hundreds of thousands of dollars. She's thinking more along that they could go out and have a nice dinner once in a while. I think some people have thought, hey, it's gotten out of hand that way.
Well, so certainly the money the dollar signs are huge. Now, I don't know that the dollar signs weren't huge before NIL was approved, right? There was a lot of money that was trading hands underneath the table. And these big time programs who had some big time scandals involving sneaker companies, runners, people were getting paid in the past. Now it's at least a level playing field for everyone. But I think you're right. People's eyes kind of pop when they see a potential $8 million NIL deal for a 5-star quarterback, right? That's a lot of money.
Yes.
But where the NCAA gets into trouble is when they try to set limits. They initially tried to frame them as guardrails. We're trying to protect this industry. And their idea initially was to say that any of these NIL deals, they had to be more or less commensurate with fair market value for what the athlete was doing. And so if an autograph is worth $20, that's what they should be paid. Not that the athlete's going to get $400,000 Alexis in exchange for a couple of posts on social media. But the problem with that is the NCAA has a really good history over the last 20 years of losing in court. And that is what they are really worried about. They're worried about another layer of antitrust litigation, especially after the Alston case, right? When that comes out and Judge Kavanaugh's concurrence in there basically calls out the NCAA and says, I wish this case had asked for more because I would have granted it, right? And you have a 9-0 decision for a court and for a country, frankly, that is as divided as it's been in decades, if not longer. So that's a remarkable loss for the NCAA, and that certainly is in the back of their minds as they're thinking about what's going on and what next steps should be taken.
Can we talk about something I know I'm confused? I think a lot of people are confused of, and that's collective. Can you describe what a collective is, how it all works?
So there are a couple of different collectives. We'll talk a little bit about the different types, and there's also some that are for-profit and some that are not for-profit. And if they're for-profit, they're just set up as a limited liability company in whatever jurisdiction they're located in. And then the models of those for-profits generally go into two different types. One is going to be a sort of a marketplace style collective where they are facilitating connections between the athletes and people who want to hire them to go and be at a corporate event for a couple $1,000 or to do your answering machine message on your phone. those are smaller dollar amounts. The more common ones that we're seeing are the ones that are funneling or collecting money from a larger pool of individuals. And so you might have some that are subscription based, where they reach out to John or Jane Q Public and say, for $10 a month or $50 a month or whatever you want to give, you can funnel this money to the collective, and then we will act and we will give out the dollars to those athletes who we deem most worthy or deserving of that money. And that's going to be a lot of people giving perhaps smaller amounts. And on the other hand, we have, which is what I think we're starting to see more and more of now that the industry is starting to mature a little bit 2 years in, you're having these big dollar boosters come in, and under the corporate umbrella or the legal umbrella of the collective, that's where they're funneling their money. And so these are the individuals who are going to be giving hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, as they're trying to figure out how to make NIL deals in a landscape where you are, at least on the surface, not violating pay for play. Right now, the other type that we briefly mentioned was the not-for-profit deal. This one is where the idea behind it is the collective will incorporate as a 501c3 not-for-profit. That means that potentially the people who are donating to that collective can get a tax deduction based on that. And then the way that those are typically handled is that 501c3 not-for-profit collective will pay the student athlete for the NIL, and the athlete will render some service to the charity that's selected. And so they might say, we're going to have our athletes show up every Saturday for a month at XYZ charity event.
Okay. Now, with the collective, so can a person, Joe's Ford down the street, okay, got a lot of money. You get into the gray area of, is he a booster, isn't he? Okay. Let's say he doesn't buy season tickets, so he's never to give. He can give, my understanding, he can give $100,000 or the case like a Texas A&M. I remember there was a realty company that gave $1 million to a quarterback. Yeah. He can do that, right? As long as he has the NIL paperwork and the player has the NIL.
That's right. And even if he's a booster, if it's a current student athlete, not a prospective one, it's a current student athlete, those boosters can enter into NIL deals, right? They're going to have to paper it. They're going to have to make sure that there's no inducements or no improper recruiting. But typically, once that student athlete's on campus, that's where the NCAA over the last 24 months has really relaxed its rules a little bit, even allowing universities and their employees to be involved in facilitating connections, facilitating meeting space, etc. It's where you have the prospective student athlete, whether it's a high school student or someone who is going to hit the portal or maybe in the portal. That's where those entities, boosters, collectives, whatever, can still get into trouble. Right? But with the current student athletes, they have more ability to act and to enter into those deals with them. Though, of course, when you see these multi-million dollar deals, people are still scratching their heads and wondering, what's the market value that's driving that? How is that not inducement?
Yeah, right. Exactly. So I've seen this. So I think we have at Creighton, we have open doors, right?
Yep.
Right.
That's right.
So I've seen this, and you mentioned earlier, you said, well, the school will figure out how to divvy up where, but I see like some of the ladies golf team has open doors. I mean, how is that money divvied up in any way, shape, or form, and how is it equal, and how is it? Who makes that decision?
Yeah, the school actually has no role in that. So the school's not making any allocation decisions. The school's not saying to individuals, give your money here, there, or the other place, and they're not supposed to be doing that. So this is more like a marketplace type of setting where the school says, look, there is this marketplace. If you want to participate, you can, and people who want to buy your services can find you on that site, hire you, and pay you in that way. So there's not going to be, there might be inequality, but it wouldn't be a Title IX type of issue. It would just be the market says that this athlete is worth X and this other athlete is worth 5X, right? And those are the individuals who the athlete themselves can kind of set those prices and say, this is what I want to charge for this type of event. And if there's a buyer, there's a buyer.
We had Catherine Lemke. I know she's an open door. So in other words, somebody would go there and say, Catherine, could you come to my golf event? As long as that doesn't break any NCAA rules, who knows? But come here and do this for an hour or whatever.
That's right.
We will pay you blah blah blah.
Yeah, and I think that's how the NCAA hoped that NIL might go, where you have these athletes who are able to do autograph signings, photo shoots, attending corporate events, and they're making, as you said earlier, some nice walking around money, right? So that was kind of the NCAA's hope, maybe Pollyanna-ish a bit, but they were, I think, always worried about NIL turning into exactly what it has turned into, which is just unrestricted free agency and dollars that are incredible in their size and scope.
So if David, if the schools and the coaches, if they can't really, from a technical standpoint, be involved much with NIL and obviously, the collectives, but it's very clearly, at least in basketball and football, very, very, very clearly a recruiting tool. So how is that possible then? I mean, is it just kind of a look the other way? But like I'm curious how a lot of these places can even sort of guarantee a number to a lot of these top kids of what they might get paid if they're technically not supposed to be involved.
Right, and they're not supposed to be guaranteeing any money. Right, that would send up red smoke, red flames to the NCAA in no time flat. But they can have careful conversations. And so one thing that they are allowed to do is give factual statements about athletes who have NIL deals with them. So we can say, our athlete has this deal, right? They cannot promise and they cannot commit, right? There can be nothing that's there with recruiting or inducement. The next step, though, that we're going to see over the next 12 months as this industry continues to evolve is we're going to see one of two things. The first thing is very likely to happen, the second less so. The first is different states are now passing laws that are preventing or prohibiting the NCAA from finding any violations of either the student athletes or the universities as it pertains to NIL related issues. So I think Arkansas, Texas, Missouri, Colorado, Mississippi, and maybe Oklahoma. And as I'm going through those states in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, that's SEC country, right? I don't think that is coincidence. So these states are trying to do what California did 2 years ago, because California was the first to kind of jump in and say, we are going to allow college athletes in California to make money based on their name, image, and likeness, more or less daring the NCAA, right? It's an old-fashioned game of chicken, and NIL won. And so now you start to see these other states coming up with the same type of legislation. And the NCAA is kind of in a difficult position because they did just pass a new regulation, a new bylaw last fall that took effect this January that changed the burden or the presumption of guilt. And so what they say now for NIL cases is if there is smoke, the presumption is there's fire unless you, the school, can show us that there's not a fire. So as they're going through some of these NIL, as they start to engage in more of this NIL enforcement action, they're actually putting the burden on the school to show that they're innocent rather than having to prove that the school was in fact guilty. We've only seen, at least I've only seen one reported case, and that was one where it was the University of Miami and they self-reported and they accepted the punishment handed out. And it was because the evidence was so clear on social media. I'll be really curious to see if there's going to be a contested action, what we might see going forward there. Because the NCAA, while they want to enforce their rules and while they want to prohibit pay for play, they're really cognizant of the legal landscape right now. And so that brings me to my second point. As these other states start to get in this game, and you're going to see that all the other states are going to have to follow, because otherwise you're at a competitive disadvantage for your athletes. And so if Texas falls, I expect to see Florida do something similar, and probably California not too long thereafter. And after those three, there aren't that many jurisdictions that are going to hold out or are going to be afraid of an NCAA challenge. And so then we've been hearing a lot of scuttlebutt this summer about potential federal laws that would provide a federal type of resolution for this issue. And the positive for that is that it would be equal across all 50 states, right? So you wouldn't have an unfair recruiting advantage based on NIL solely based on your state law. I've been working with one senator on one version of a bill. I see that Senator Graham also has a second proposal. It's involving a clearinghouse. I think both of these are going to be ambitious asks. And if you had to ask me to bet, do I think that they're going to pass this summer? I would say probably not. I think that it's not terribly likely. And we can talk more about the different bills too in a bit, but that's kind of where we are with the landscape.
Okay.
You know, right now the states.
I do want to get to the legislation part of it too, because I think the clearinghouse thing kind of interests me a little bit. But I want to ask one question back, because this is something that confuses me. So I think you've explained everything perfectly. And let's put Creighton over here for a second, off to the side. All right. So we don't want to talk local. We'll talk Team X. Okay. So Team X has a basketball team, and they're pretty good, and so on and so forth. They can be in a Power 5 conference. It's fine. So they're basically paying each of their guys $300,000 to $400,000. Okay. Now you were saying before that in these collectives they would go to get this money. So in order for the coach to, and maybe the coach gets involved and says, hey, I don't want, when he's recruiting, somebody comes up and says, well, I want $650,000. And the coach said, well, our guys are making this. He can say that our guys are making this. I'm really, that's about what you're going to get. Hint, hint. Right. That's all you're going to get. So that money, when we're talking that range of money, okay, that's coming from these big boosters who are all piling it into this collective, basically, or maybe even doing individual. Correct?
Yeah, I think that's a correct assumption in the vast majority of the cases. You're going to have, and different schools are going to have different collectives set up in different fashions. And so let's call this school X at a Power 5 conference, and they're going to have their basketball specific collective, right? Probably, just like they'll also have their football specific collective. And so that collective will, for better or for worse, have probably conversations with different individuals, whether they're associated with the university or not, about their targets for fundraising, what they're trying to do, what they're trying to accomplish. And then they might come out and say, here's what we're trying to do. And so I think we saw, I can't remember if it was Texas or Texas A&M that offered a year ago $100,000 for every offensive lineman.
Yeah.
Right. And so they're making that known. They haven't recruited anybody. They haven't talked to anybody specifically, but they're just saying, hey, look, if you're an O-lineman, you come here, you can expect a $100,000 deal. Right. With the coaches, the coaches and the athletic directors, I think they're all frustrated with where we are right now, because they want to comply with the NCAA. They want to make sure that they're running clean programs. And yet they're fielding phone calls all the time from these NIL agents saying, look, my kid's going to get this much somewhere else. What can you do? And the coach has got to say, yeah, I can't tell you about this. We can't guarantee anything. We can't induce. We can't do this to recruit. All the while knowing that the collectives are in the background doing more or less that, right? Where they might have someone reach out and say, look, I hear you're looking for, X dollars. Here's the kind of deal that we've been putting together, just FYI. And it's all very gray, right? It's in a gray area, and I'm sure you've heard this a million times by now, but this industry is just in its wild, wild west days. Mm-hmm. I think that's where you have people pulling their hair out, because they want to have clear rules, but they don't want to lose all these great athletes if other programs are out there doing the same thing. And they're thinking, well, this is what I got to do to keep up with the Joneses. And I think that's the space that we find ourselves in right now. We haven't had federal legislation yet. It's still only 2 years old. People are still trying to figure out the wrinkles, and with the one-time transfer rule hitting at more or less the same time, that's really, I think, what's causing a lot of angst, right? Yeah. if it was just in the recruitment phase and you're talking about high school kids, you're thinking, oh, okay, they're going to come, that would be a one-time event. But now with everybody able to hit the portal and move immediately and be immediately eligible, right now the college athletes have kind of the best of all worlds because they have great flexibility, great freedom. They have some pretty good market knowledge just because these things are being reported day in, day out. They can search social media to see who's getting what kind of postings. And as a result, that they're in the driver's seat. And I think they know it for now.
You brought up 2 points. I'll let Ross back in here, but we had a couple questions from our viewers, and I want to get to those. You mentioned agents, okay? So this is another confusing aspect. Do players have quote-unquote agents who go and see what they can get when, especially you mentioned the portal, they go in the portal and now they got 6 schools in mind. Do they have their agents dealing with these 6 schools?
So yes, they do. So first of all, can the student athletes have agents? They can have NIL agents, right? So if they hired a traditional agent that would help them go into the professional ranks, that's the kind of agency contact that would make them ineligible, just like it had in the past.
It's crazy to me. It's nuts to me.
But they are allowed to have agents for NIL purposes, and you can see why. These kids are getting these $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 deals or more. You would want them to have some good advice, and I've been able to work on a couple of deals, and sometimes these kids, we forget how young they are, and they don't have that kind of sophistication for reading through a contract and understanding exclusivity provisions or what kind of deliverables are going to be required when, or if they're independent contractors, keeping money aside for tax day. So it's on that side of things, it's probably a good thing for the student athlete. But on the back end, now you have these coaches who, they have the agent, not the player, but the agent contacting, and whether they're thinking about joining the portal or in the portal, those are all discussions that are fraught with danger in terms of NIL violations and NCAA violations. Right? The collectives aren't supposed to be inducing or recruiting. Coaches are definitely not supposed to be inducing or recruiting. And you don't have to do much more than a single Google search to see all these big name athletes especially in men's football, men's basketball, where they're leaving every year.
Sure. And that's exactly where I was getting to, because then the agent comes and says, my guy wants 450, and currently those players are about 400, and the coach may go, yeah, okay, you know what I mean? It's like Mike DeCourcy, a guy who I know quite well, obviously a national sports writer, said, everybody's complaining about this, the portal and NIL together, and he's like, look at it like the NFL. The Super Bowl ends, and usually we didn't talk about the NFL till July. Now we're talking about the NFL all the way through because there's free agency. College basketball ends 1st of April. Now we've been talking about college basketball for the last 2 months. He goes, I don't know that's a bad thing, Yeah.
And I think that's a great point that you bring up, because the NFL system is there because it's collectively bargained, right? So that free agency is controlled through that collective bargaining. And that's the other shoe that we might see drop in the near term. We have 2 potential cases. One's the Johnson case involving that football player from Villanova who's seeking protection under the FLSA for minimum wage, claiming that he's an employee. The other one is the kids out in USC through the National Labor Relations Act who are saying that they're employees and are entitled to collectively bargain. Both cases have had indications that suggest the athletes, the students, have a fair to good chance to prevailing at being classified as an employee. And if that happens, well, that's going to make an upheaval like NIL look pretty small in comparison.
Yeah, right. Yeah, when you talked about the state laws and so forth, I know before I was telling you, Blue Jay Banner and their golf tournament, we've donated a little bit, pennies compared to what we're talking about here. But I remember talking with Coach Huss. He said, yeah, here's the law, read the law. And I read the Nebraska law and I went, could they make this any vaguer? Like, it was just like they didn't want to go. You could tell they did not want to go over that edge. They just as vague as possible. So I do want to move. Let's talk about Graham, and then we'll get into the international aspect. Lindsey Graham put forth, what do you think about the clearinghouse that he brought up? Like you said, you don't think it would pass. But basically what I read was he was going to give that full carte blanche. They're going to be able to do enforcement, so basically take it away from the NCAA. A lot of people might go, "Wow, that's a great idea."
Well, so it doesn't say that it's taking it away from the NCAA. That clearinghouse, I read through the full version of that proposal earlier today, and I'm not so sure that it doesn't involve the NCAA. It says that it can create this clearinghouse, and that could be a third party. It could be a controlled entity of the NCAA. But what I saw in that bill that was probably the biggest barrier for it to pass is that it's got the guardrail in place that says we are going to limit what you can make based on fair market value. And that to me is just a huge can of worms, because now you're trying to figure out what is fair market value. And fair market value, I studied economics in college. Fair market value, something is worth
very subjective.
Right. If someone's willing to pay that, that's fair market value.
Yeah.
And so that's where it's going to be potentially problematic. Now, on the plus side, from the NCAA's point of view, is it has that antitrust exemption, meaning that they're going to walk in, the NCAA or this clearinghouse, with all of the pros, the positives of collective bargaining, without the negative of classifying these individuals as employees. Now, there are some other elements of the bill that were kind of interesting about that universities could prevent athletes from engaging in certain types of deals that might be prohibited by law or the student code of conduct. And those are the kinds of NIL deals, I suppose, that may include things like gambling, legalized marijuana if you're in a state that has it legalized, things that might be hot button social issues. I don't know. I mean, it's somewhat narrowly tailored, but in my opinion, the part that's going to get attacked with the most fervor by the athlete lobby will be those limitations on what is fair market value.
You talked up, and I want to get into the international players next, because we've had some questions on that, basically Arizona questions. And you talked about the players, and we talked about transfer portal, and the question from one of our listeners came up. Is there any thought to maybe in part of this legislation and so forth, that when these players sign a contract, that contract is for, if the NIL goes, you got to stay here 2 years or 3 years or what have you?
That's not been in any of the proposed legislation that I've seen that would have that sort of string attached to it. Right, because that now is bringing the university into the deal, and the university cannot be part of the entity that's providing that quid pro quo back and forth.
Scholarships are year to year. That would be the problem.
Right? Scholarships are year to year. Now, the Graham bill did say that the schools can't punish the athletes based on their NIL activity. That I'm not as concerned with. So for the international side of things, that's where it gets a little bit trickier, because when the NCAA initially announced their interim rule for NIL, they said that international student athletes would be entitled to take advantage of it just like our domestic-based athletes. But that's from the NCAA's point of view, right? That's not from the U.S. government's point of view. The U.S. government says, for the most part, these student athletes are here on F visas, student visas. And those visas provide very limited ability to work. And unfortunately, from the athlete's point of view, none of them would include NIL-based activity. And so when this was initially rolled out, you saw a lot of headlines, and that was the ESPN article you referred to too, about these student athletes, the international athletes, being left out of NIL. They're not left out if they're careful. And so what you start to see now is that there's a fair amount of workarounds. And one of the reasons that you bring up Arizona, which I think is great, is because Arizona, U of A, is in Tucson. Tucson's pretty close to the Mexican border. So these international students, if they want to go and do a photo shoot, if they want to go and do some social media postings, if they go and they do that outside the United States, well, now they're not running afoul of U.S. immigration law, and they're able to make money based on NIL. So we've seen Gatorade has had some commercials shot down in Mexico and Cancun. We've seen individuals going back to host camps in their home countries, for whatever sport that they're in. Some places, some collectives will actually ship a lot of merchandise to that athlete's home in their home country. The athlete will get there. The athlete will then sign that merch and send it back and get paid in their home country. Whether or not there are social media posts. So when I've been working on these kinds of deals, I always make it very clear that the athletes need to geolocate themselves whenever they're going to engage in that social media post. So if it's on Insta, Twitter, whatever, that they say, look, I have documented, here is where I was when I made this. So that they're still able to make money, but it's a little bit more challenging to do so. Now, for someone like basketball, for example, if you have a trip to the Bahamas that's outside the US, you can take advantage of that trip and do some of that NIL activity for an international athlete while you're there. Otherwise, you're looking at when you go home for breaks over the summer. That's when a lot of these athletes are doing things back in their home countries, is over the summer. And there's no rule that says they have to space out their NIL earnings over 12 months. So they can go back and make all of their NIL earnings for a year in that month of June or July in their home country, and then they're set.
Wait, sorry, David, I can't remember if you answered this. So they can or they cannot get paid by the collectives?
They can get paid by the collectives.
They can. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they can. Yep. And collectives have been doing deals with them probably almost from the outset. Initially, there was some wariness by schools because they did not want to jeopardize the student's visa status with good reason. But as long as you're not doing that NIL activity within the United States, right off the bat, you're fine. The other exception is if the income is passive. So if you're just licensing the use of an image from an athlete, let's say the athlete has mom, dad, or agent in the home country, licensing that image out, even if the athlete's here in the United States the entire time, that should also be okay. You just want to make sure that you don't raise the antenna of the immigration officials, because if you do so, you jeopardize your chance to get a professional visa down the road.
So how sustainable is all of this in the long term? Because to me, it seems like, and you referenced this earlier, and everybody knows this, it's the Wild West. These two forces came together at one with the COVID, the transfer portal, and being able to transfer now without sitting out, and the NIL, and it's just become complete and utter chaos. And I don't know that these numbers that are being thrown around are going to stick. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I think your insight is right, especially initially. When it first happened, it was so exciting. Oh, now we can go out and get this amazing player for alma mater U, right? Like my university will be able to succeed, and I like that. And I think that donors have finite numbers of dollars, at least most of them do. Some of them have just too much money to know what to do with. But most of them have finite dollars. And they're going to say, do I want to continue doing this or not? Same with the subscription model, where you have some individuals giving $10 a month, $100 a month, whatever it might be. There's going to be donor fatigue there. I think what we're going to see is the same trend we've seen with conference realignment. And that is the rich are going to get richer. The rich are going to keep spending. And you're going to have losers in the marketplace because they're not going to be able to keep up with those kinds of dollar amounts. And so as we start to see the Big Ten look at further realignment, we see where Notre Dame might fall. We see the SEC maybe gobbling up some of the ACC. We're going to have haves and have-nots in a very real way monetarily. And so that would be kind of what I think would be the most likely, unless there is some kind of correction put in place, that we're going to see each and every year smaller schools are going to be losing their athletes in the portal to the bigger schools that can pay for them.
Mm-hmm. One last thing, we'll let you go. You've been so generous with your time. This has been outstanding. There was a little bit of question when this first started. I think that's kind of gone by the wayside, but I think when the first started, when, again, let's talk about Joe's Ford, pays money to have this player, the intent was then the player somehow does something for Joe's Ford. That was kind of the intent of it. I don't know that happens anymore, but that was kind of the intent of it, correct?
So it should still happen, right? There should be a quid pro quo, right? If it is just a cash gift, that if I'm an NCAA enforcement agent, I would be just licking my chops because I'm ready to go with that one. So for whatever that athlete is hired to do, And this is one of the things when I talk to people who are setting it up as a 501c3, I say, look, make sure that if you're giving athletes this money, that you can document that you got what they said that they were going to do, that they showed up at that charity event, that they signed the jerseys, that they engaged with this activity, whatever it might be, because you still cannot have pay for play. And if you're just giving cash without any obligation on the other end, well, that looks exactly like pay for play, right? And that still is prohibited under the NCAA. And so that's where you start to see people saying, if we're going to do this, we need to do it right. And that's where you get people like me, lawyers coming in saying, how can we paper this deal to make sure that we're checking all the boxes that we need to check to make sure that this is a valid deal, right?
So you do this full time? I mean, right now is this pretty much nonstop?
Well, so it's going on day in, day out. I have a full-time job teaching, so I get to just kind of dabble from the sidelines when I want to, which is also fun. But in terms of an industry, it's fun because it's so unknown. You have to really figure out how to read the tea leaves. And I always want to counsel people to take the approach that's most defensible, right? You want to have a clean program. You want to be able to, when the NCAA comes knocking on your door, give them everything and say, look, this is a clean program, right? We've seen too many scandals at other universities where it doesn't go that way, and then you start losing scholarships, start losing athletes, start losing recruiting days, and it doesn't take too long for that to snowball.
But safe to say, Creighton leans on you a little bit for advice and.
Well, I'm not an official representative, but I co-teach one of our classes in the summer. So we actually provide a class for student athletes that is to educate them on things like the legal issues behind NIL, things like how do you build your own brand, trademarks, how do you make sure that you're paying taxes, how do you deal with the financial issue. So I absolutely help there in any way I can.
I don't know, Creighton's been really out front with this NIL for their size of school, really. I mean, they've been on it immediately and had a good program. David, thank you so much. Yeah, this has been awesome. This cleared up a lot of confusion, a lot of questions, and thank you so much. And we get a big NIL deal, we'll reach out to you again. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, fellas. Have a good night.
You bet. Thanks. That's David Weber, professor of law at Creighton University and faculty moderator for the sports law concentration. Ross, I learned a ton. How about you?
Yeah, sharp guy. Really knows what he was talking about. That was very, very informative. Yeah, I'm glad we had him on, no doubt.
Yeah, I'm glad because I was just confused, like the collective, like he said, there's not just a collective. There's so many layers to it. There's all these different layers, and I got into a discussion at BlueJayBanner.com with somebody way back when this started. They're like, no. People can just give them money. And I go, no, there has to be something that comes back. Whatever that is, show up at the car lot for 1 hour and, he's worth $400,000. I don't know, but that's what it is. I mean.
Yeah, it's a crazy world, as everybody knows at this point. They're trying to regulate it. There's a lot of people that are trying to get involved in regulating it. I don't think that we need government intervention, to be quite frank. But
we may have to, if it keeps getting crazy, though. We got to have some.
Yeah,
right now, you can't tell me this player goes to the school and says, "Well, I'll come play guard for you, but I want $700,000." You can't tell me that the coaches aren't negotiating and
no, I'm with you.
You can't tell me that's not happening.
No, I agree. And
I don't blame the coaches. I mean, what are they supposed to do? I mean,
no, I agree. I don't know that I know the right answer, to be honest. I don't think anybody does.
Yeah, amazing stuff.
Crazy.
Well, I'm so glad we had him on. We want to thank our sponsors, Equitable Bank, We Take Banking Personally, West Pacific Dental Group, and Infusion Brewery. Thanks for joining us tonight. We're going to be off for the next 2 weeks. Off next week's Memorial Day, and then we'll be off the next Monday. We'll be back right before, that'll be before the College World Series, won't it? The June, whatever, 10th, something like that. But hopefully by then we will have some news we will have news on the two guys that are in the NBA Combine. We'll have news on them, and we'll be able to kind of look and see if the roster is solidified and move forward from there. And then we'll jump back into our Take Your Shot feature. All right. Thank you, Ross. Thank you, Zach.